Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 169. I am the host, Kyle. On this episode of the show, I'm going to be discussing the situation in Syria. About a year ago, I was looking back and I was talking on the show about Syria and comparing it to the TV show Game of Thrones, just in the craziness and the moving around of alliances and really how hard it is to keep track of and explain what's going on within that war. So I'm going to be trying to do another breakdown on Syria today, just to keep everybody up to date because things are continuing to shift around. If you would like to share this show, the best ways to do that would be to go to foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or libertarianinstitute.org, and you can find the show there on the homepage or at /Kyles. Before I get into the serious stuff, I really quick just want to make a correction. 2 shows ago, 167, I believe, I discussed the situation with Rex Tillerson being fired and then Pompeo and Gina Haspel at least being nominated to get promotions. Gina Haspel, as I explained, is a career-long CIA agent. I referenced a ProPublica article published in February of 2017, and in that article they said that Gina Haspel oversaw the torture of Abu Zabieda at the Thailand CIA Blatt site. However, some people involved in that torture program, including Dr. Mitchell, who one of the worst human beings on the planet, has come out and said that actually Gina Haspel was not the person overseeing that site at the time. Later, when she came and was in charge of that site, probably in October of 2002, there were at least 3 waterboardings that did occur under her direction. And so this doesn't change my position on Gina Haspel a little bit, but I think it's important because on the last show I did mention that she oversaw the 86 waterboardings of that one detainee. It still appears that she was involved in the destruction and had ordered the destruction and convinced her supervisors to give her permission to destroy the tapes that showed the evidence that the waterboarding and other torture methods did occur at that Thailand site. And she still oversaw some waterboarding. She's still a war criminal. There is still the issue out there that this is somebody who obviously doesn't have very high moral standards. It's not like she blew the whistle on the torture program. In fact, she worked hard to cover it up. And so we have Rand Paul out there, Senator Rand Paul, who's doing a great job opposing this. I think everybody, if you can, give your support to Rand because he's going to take a lot of heat for this one. Pompeo is a kind of a straight up neocon. Gina Haspel, first woman to be nominated to be CIA director. She is also a career-long CIA member, and so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people pushing for Rand to kind of bat down and just accept these 2 and vote for these 2 nominations. However, that may not happen. He's finding an unlikely ally on this one. That is Senator John McCain, who's terrible on every single issue ever except the torture issue, and that's because he was actually tortured himself. And so we're seeing a lot, some possible opposition from John McCain on these 2 candidates as well. So with, a full Democratic opposition and maybe some Republican additional support beyond McCain and Paul, we could see that these 2 nominations may actually get blocked, and that would be a pretty huge victory. It's very funny to see, though, that how many people are still committed to the torture narrative and are defending Gina Haspel for her torture for her torture involvement. It's not like they're saying that, well, she was involved in it, but it was way back in 2002 and things have changed at the CIA and they don't do that kind of stuff anymore. But it's that she was just following orders. She was doing what she was told. She was doing the right thing to defend the country. And we have Liz Cheney saying this on Twitter. And of course, she's elected a representative, I think, still in Wyoming now. And it's not just that, torture is being something that we're not proud of, but we've moved on from. It's something that, we still have U.S. officials endorsing and saying this was the correct way to do things. Last note, we have Heather Nauert. Nauert. She was the former spokesperson for the State Department, has been promoted to Undersecretary of State, which is a pretty prominent position. She's had a very quick rise, at least according to the AP article I read on the situation. Just a year or so ago, she was hosting Fox and Friends in the morning and doesn't seem to really have any notable foreign policy experience so far. However, she seems to be able to toe the deep state party line on the foreign policy angle. In fact, she was in Israel down in what they call one of the terrorist tunnels, and I'm sure just eating up all the propaganda the IDF was feeding her about how terrible the Palestinians are when she got the information that Rex Tillerson was fired. And so it doesn't look like she's going to be a friend to non-intervention as she moves forward in her career. Last thing before we get to Syria, we had a U.S. Navy F-18 crash, and I think both pilots ended up dying, so very sad situation there. But this is the cost of war. And so when everybody likes to talk about what it means for the U.S. to keep up this maximum pressure campaign against North Korea, they pretend like there's never any American lives that are ever at risk or injured or anything that America loses at all. And it costs us a lot of money, and that's a problem. But even more so, we end up carrying out all these training missions and put a lot more hours on our military equipment. And so you have more failings and more people die. Right, now on to Syria. So I think the biggest news going on right now is what's happening in Afrin. I reported to you guys sometime last week, I believe, that the Turks and their allied forces, either the Free Syrian Army, which are, filled with jihadists, or the other Syrian rebels, Anwar al-Sham or Dinar al-Zinki or HTS al-Nusra, and then some Turkish soldiers have besieged the city of Afrin, which is, I guess, the biggest city within the Afrin enclave that's been controlled by the Syrian Kurds. The YPG has controlled this for a long period of time, and they really haven't fought against the Syrian Arab Army throughout the Syrian Civil War. So up until January 20th, when the Turkish government announced Operation Olive Branch, this was one of the few areas of Syria that wasn't completely, devastated by war. Even in the Rojava state, which is the main area held by the Syrian Kurds, you have the town of Kobani that when the United States, liberated it, or that's what we call it, from ISIS, we pretty much flattened the town or the city. And so it looked like this was going to be a real problem because we have hundreds of thousands of people living in the city. The people in the city are all Kurds, and we know that Turkey, especially under Erdogan, has been very hostile towards the Kurdish people and has demanded that they withdraw to the other side of the Euphrates River. And so it looked like this was going to be like kind of a Eastern Ghouta style siege in Syria that we've seen so many times, whether it was Mosul or Raqqa or East Aleppo or now East Ghouta. These sieges have been absolutely brutal. Thousands of civilians have died, 40,000 in Mosul, a couple thousand in Raqqa, at least 1,000 in the past couple weeks in East Ghouta. And the Kurds, the YPG were well armed and well prepared for a fight. That wasn't a fight that they were going to be able to win, but they were, prepared to hold out and fight. And what I found to be a completely unsuspecting move, and if you had listened to my last show talking about Syria, I had thought that, we would end up having this siege situation of Afrin City. I guess the Afrin Civilian Council voted that all the civilians were going to just up and abandon the city before they were completely, unable to go because the city was, completely surrounded and being shelled and bombed. Before this decision was made, I had read reports that tens of civilians were being killed by Turkish bombings of the city, including the main hospital in Afrin City was hit and killed 9 people. And so I'm not sure why, but they decided to leave, and it looks like the YPG, the militia force, also withdrew from the city as well. So Turkey now is in the center of the city. They're tearing down the Kurdish flags or the Syrian flags, and they're hanging up Turkish flags, and they're ripping down some Kurdish statues. And so it seems pretty obvious now that this is a Turkish occupation of the Syrian Kurdish lands. I read one report from a mainstream source, I believe it was the AP, and they said that 2,000 Kurdish civilians remained in Afrin. And it's always hard to tell because they don't specify whether that's the city or the enclave itself. But it seems from Isani22 on Twitter saying that at least the plan was for all the civilians to get out. I'm sure some people stay, just like you have in the United States, that occasionally there'll be a wildfire coming and some homeowners say, well, I'm not leaving my house. Asani22 also reported that along with this announcement, the YPG, I guess, announced that they're now going to be fighting a guerrilla war in Afrin against the Turkish occupation. So, we'll see how this goes. Occupations don't go well for the occupier or the occupied. Obviously, the civilians that remain in Afrin, especially the Kurdish civilians, are going to take probably a pretty brutal beating here and will be subject to some pretty unfair justice at the hands of the Turkish occupation. And remember that, the Turks are backed by Syrian rebel groups, and I'm sure at some positions they're going to put these people in charge. And some of these guys are former ISIS, are current jihadist Al-Qaeda style fighters. And so there's going to be some bad guys running around and ruling Afrin and fighting under the Turkish flag. Now, I'm not sure how this plays into what the United States and Turkey had come out and said last week, and that was that they would jointly, I guess, hold the city of Manbij, which is... So the longtime demand of Turkey, as far as the Syrian Kurds goes, that they have to remain on the east side of the Euphrates River. One of the cities, other than the other Afrin, that they held on the west side of the Euphrates was the city of Manbij. And like I said, it was announced last week that Turkey and the United States would jointly hold the city, and the United States, I guess, would move the Syrian Kurds out of that city. And so, I don't know, maybe there's a bigger deal in play here, and that agreement is no longer in effect. Maybe they traded Manbij for Afrin. I'm guessing we're going to get more details in the days to come in what's going on here, but it does seem like at least the facts on the ground are that Turkey, along with their Syrian rebel allies, now control the Afrin enclave of Syria, that at least most of the civilian organizations ordered a withdrawal of civilians from most of the enclave, and Erdogan would be the most powerful, geopolitical force that dominates a very large region of Syria now, from the Idlib province and all the northern Aleppo province all the way to the Euphrates River. So that certainly seems like a significant point as well, that how the situation has unfolded in Syria is suddenly Erdogan has a very large foothold and a lot of power in Syrian lands. And it really seems to me that this is going to be a Turkish occupation of these Kurdish lands. I think that's all I have on the Afrin situation. Moving on to Ghouta real quick. It looks like Assad is continuing, and his allied forces are continuing their advance and taking ground as the Damascus suburb here. In fact, we now have reports that Assad forces control 70% of what was once the Syrian rebel enclave there. It does seem like some civilians are starting to get out, and that some of these are maybe agreed to or planned withdrawals. I'm hearing a lot of reports and a lot of rumors that there are talks going on between the different rebel groups and the Syrian government. So that will allow civilians and fighters to withdraw in exchange for Syrian forces being able to come in and take over the territory. They could continue to move either south towards the Israeli border, where there's some Syrian rebels there, or north to the Idlib province, where there's large groups of Syrian rebels there as well. But the bombing by the Assad side continues. They're using incendiary rounds, I don't know if it's actually napalm, but rounds that start fires. This is obviously a problem and very indiscriminate, and I'm sure it means that a lot of civilians are, taking unnecessarily burn wounds and dying from it, terrible things, and likely a war crime. Again, we also have reports from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights that Assad is now using cluster bombs in Eastern Ghouta. I guess I have a little bit of skepticism here, just because so many of the cluster munitions don't end up exploding, and it seems like if Syria is using cluster bombs here, this is going to be a huge problem for them once these areas are liberated, and they're going in with their bulldozers and trying to clear away all the debris and stuff like that, because all these little explosions that don't go off during the main cluster bomb explosion are going to be detonating and possibly killing Syrian forces or cleanup crews. So I'm not saying it's impossible that Assad is that short-sighted and he's just trying to inflict as much pain as possible to get these people to agree to some kind of deal so they get out of the region of Damascus, but a very brutal fighting going on there. It does seem like now some civilians are getting out of East Ghouta. I've read reports that maybe up to 3,000 have been able to leave. Last thing I want to get to here is that we now have, kind of the grander U.S.-Russia issue, because we have reports out of the United States that the U.S. is looking to attack Assad positions either in retribution for what they're doing in East Ghouta or for alleged chemical attacks or whatever else. And Russia has said that they will respond if the United States does that. Again, Assign22 on Twitter was talking about how there's also the possibility that the United States could end up attacking Syrian allied forces along the Syria-Iraq border that's controlled by Assad forces. Of course, you have the constant fear-mongering among the American neocons of this land bridge from Tehran to Beirut that's going to threaten Israel gravely, which is a red herring that I've debunked on several past shows. I'll link to one of those shows in the show notes page. But that is another possible flashpoint between the United States and Russia, because if we start attacking Syrian forces and Russia starts attacking us, who knows where we go from there. All right, moving on to the rest of the Middle East, we have a Palestinian man crashing a car into 4 IDF soldiers and then killing 2 of them. I just wanted to bring this up because I'm guessing that we're going to see some headlines where they say, Palestinian man kills IDF soldiers in ISIS-style attack, because we've seen in some Western countries that this is a new, I guess, preferred method of people who don't have access to other weapons. Is cars make good weapons. They're really heavy. You could drive them really fast and you could hit things and kill people. But the Palestinians don't have, this isn't a terrorist organization type of thing that the Palestinians are somehow a threat to the United States or have any plans to start carrying out car attacks in the United States. This is the situation of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And of course, that isn't to excuse the actions of this man who ran down 2 people. In Iraq, we have 7 U.S. Armed Forces members killed in a helicopter crash near the Syrian border. So far, the United States is saying that there was no combat and this was some kind of malfunction. Want to update the situation in Yemen, specifically with the Res 54, the Yemen War Powers Act, that's going to hopefully end at least part of the U.S. war in Yemen. I want to talk about kind of the 3 main strategies going on as far as it applies to the Yemen War Powers Act. The first one is that the Pentagon, and they're just saying that what the United States is doing by supporting Saudi Arabia, selling them weapons, providing them with intelligence, logistics, helping to enforce the blockade, the mid-air refueling, and the maintenance on the plane does not rise to the level of what the president needs permission from Congress for in order to fight a war. However, it pretty clearly states in the War Powers Act that the president needs to seek permission from Congress before providing a country with assistance that's likely to lead to that country fighting someone. So if we're refueling the Saudi planes on their way to Yemen, then we're obviously assisting in their bombing of Yemen and them engaging in hostile activity. So it very clearly does rise to that level. However, this is how HCON Res 81 was treated in the House and how that had its teeth removed. And it looks like what the GOP leadership is doing, specifically leader Mitch McConnell, is he's trying to kick it back to the committee, and I think just trying to delay the vote to possibly allow some time for what seems to be strategy number 2, and that's Senator Young of Indiana's bill. And that bill kind of condemns the United States war in Yemen, but doesn't actually tell the president that he has to withdraw U.S. support from Saudi Arabia there, so it's pretty much meaningless, similar to House Resolution 499, which was passed saying that the United States was doing the wrong thing in Yemen, but didn't actually invoke the War Powers Act. Also worth noting on the Pentagon strategy, we have General Votel saying that the United States doesn't track what the bombs that we sell Saudi Arabia are going towards and what the mid-air refueling of Saudi planes are going to do. Because the United States does provide Saudi Arabia with bombs and mid-air refueling to fight against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, which is a completely separate group who is actually enemies of the Houthis, who Saudi Arabia is also fighting in Yemen. And so the war against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is pretty specifically left out of the bill, the Res 54, the Yemen War Powers Act. And this is one of the problems that Senator Rand Paul has with the bill, because he feels like by leaving that out of the bill, saying that no, that war also doesn't apply under the War Powers Act, it's thereby authorizing that intervention under the 2001 authorization of use of military force, which America claims authorizes us to fight a counterterrorism war against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen. However, there's a lot of controversy behind that, and the easiest way, one of the most important points, is that AQAP didn't even become a group until 2006, long after the 2001 terror attacks, which the 2001 AUMF was passed to authorize the response to that. So with the United States not tracking what's going on between the two, I think this, the third strategy that is Rand Paul saying that, well, this bill actually isn't good enough. And I think it gives a little bit of points to his argument, because if we're not tracking what the mid-air refueling or the bombs are going to, then we're just going to chalk everything up and say, oh, it's all going to, bomb AQAP, and none of our support is going to bomb the Houthis, which is completely untrue. And also the blockade that the United States is helping to support is hurting the Houthis as well, and is targeted at the Houthis. The United States government abuses their power all the time, and this would just be another example of that happening. Couple updates for stuff on the ground in Yemen. The diphtheria outbreak there is getting worse. Over 1,000 reported cases and at least 70 deaths from that outbreak. One of the, I think, scary things about the diphtheria outbreak is that this is also an outbreak that's going on in the Bangladesh refugee camps. Well, I guess the Rojava refugee camps that are in Bangladesh. And so if there's any kind of shortage or limited ability to distribute these vaccines, they may be in some sort of shortage both for Yemen or the Rojava. We also have reports that there's been some secret, kind of back channel talks going on between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia, so this is a positive thing to hear, just because anytime there's talking, then maybe we'll get a resolution to this war and people could stop dying. And the last thing is that there's some reports I'm seeing that Saudi Arabia is making some progress towards Sana'a in Yemen. Yemen is Sana'a is the capital of Yemen and is a Houthi-held city. So it doesn't look to me like the battle lines are changing an awful lot in Yemen, and it's not really clear if the Saudi forces are making any progress, if it's significant at all. Just a couple stories I want to touch on from Africa before I wrap up here. South African former President Jacob Zuma, who was just removed from office in the past couple months, will face corruption charges. I think 16 counts of corruption charges. Canada is sending 600 troops to be UN peacekeepers to Mali. These troops are coming with attack helicopters. And so this is just one of those examples of a story I like to point out. We say that we're sending peacekeepers to Mali, but our peacekeepers are coming with attack helicopters. So how do you think that's perceived by the people that are there, just seeing a bunch of foreign people come over with attack helicopters? Seems more like an, offensive invasion occupation force to me. The Pentagon did not report a December firefight between, I guess, an Islamic State affiliate and U.S. forces in Niger. It's pretty clear now that whatever the United States is doing in Niger, again, they should have the president should be seeking authorization from Congress before doing it, because the 2001 AUMF certainly can't apply all the way out to Niger. Last thing is we have the Philippines announcing that they will be withdrawing from the ICC, that is the International Criminal Court that was looking to pursue charges against Philippines leader Duterte for his brutal drug war in that country, in which is authorized a lot of extrajudicial executions of people that are just accused of being drug dealers or drug users, and it's horrific. But one of the deals with being part of the ICC is that you can only be kind of prosecuted and charged under the ICC if you're a member of the ICC, and so it makes it kind of one of these weak and worthless worldwide organizations. All right, I think that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed it. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org. If you want to donate to the show and get the episodes of the Matt's Boot debunking bonus podcast that I'm going to put out twice a month, the next episode should come in the next week. Go to patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus and donate to the show there. On Twitter at KYAAALE. The news site is immersionnews.com. The YouTube channel that I put out is also Immersion News. Check that out. All the videos of all the shows are up there. Well, I don't do video, but all the shows are up there in audio with a, I think, Foreign Policy Focus logo on them. And Libertarian Union on Facebook. Thanks, everyone.